The Three Red Caps, a 20th century fairy encounter. Back in the 1970s, a young man named Rory lived near Loch Duich in the Highlands of Scotland. Now, young Rory was a bit of a dropout, to be honest. He'd dropped out of school and dropped out of plenty of jobs because he couldn't find anything that suited him. Now, he had a family, did Rory, a good wife and a small child, so he had to do something to make ends meet. And for some reason, Rory had ended up trying his luck as a fisherman, fishing in Loch Duich. One October night there was a terrible storm with high winds and the kind of rain and hail that's capable of shattering whatever it hits. Next morning, Rory found his little fisher boat had been wrecked. There was a large hole in the side where the waves, whipped up by the wind, had blown this boat onto a large rock. Ever one to shirk working, Rory headed home and told his wife what had happened and that he couldn't possibly go out to work. His wife took none of his nonsense and told him in no uncertain terms to go out to the local woods and find a suitable bit of wood to fix the hole, and that he wouldn't get any breakfast, dinner or tea until he did. So off Rory went into the woods. It being October, the woods were full of fungi, brown ones, white ones, and the brightest one of all, the red cap or fly agaric, which is much loved by fairies, witches and shamans. As he wandered ever deeper into the woods looking for a tree to fell or a suitable bit of fallen wood, Rory heard a strange howling noise, and no sooner had he heard that he smelled smoke. Things were getting a bit scary, to say the least. The light was starting to fade, and his experiences were making the hairs on the back of his neck rise. However, he knew he wasn't going to get any dinner or tea unless he found a suitable bit of wood. Knowing where there's smoke, surely there's fire, Rory headed off towards the smoke, thinking that whoever set the fire must have some pre-cooked wood that he could use for his boat. Soon Rory came to a hut in the woods. He knocked on the door and waited politely. A wizened old woman opened the door and beckoned Rory to come inside, where there were two more women sat inside close to the fire, just as wizened and old as the first. One of the seated women pointed to a free chair, so Rory sat down and asked for some wood. Rather than answering him, the first old woman handed him a bowl of hot soup. Rory was hungry as he'd been wandering in the woods half the day, and though he was lazy, he was good-mannered and accepted the soup and the hospitality gratefully. As soon as he'd eaten the soup, his eyelids became heavy and he nodded off. A while later, one of the old women poked him on the shoulder and indicated a bed in the corner. Rory was so tired he fell into the bed, and as soon as he'd taken off his boots, and promptly fell asleep. In the middle of the night, Rory woke up, just in time to see one of the old women going to a chest near the bed. She opened the chest, took out a red cap, like those that gnomes and pixies wear, which she placed on her head and said clearly, "I'm away to London," clapped her hands and disappeared up the chimney in a poof of smoke. Naturally, Rory thought he was just having a weird dream and closed his eyes, hoping to carry on with sleeping. Minutes later, the second old lady also went to the chest, pulled out an identical red cap, placed it on her head and said, "I'm away to London," clapped her hands and disappeared up the chimney. Rory thought he was having a strange repeating dream, until the third old lady did exactly the same thing as well. By now, Rory knew he was awake and was very curious as to what on earth was going on. So he went to the chest, opened it himself, and in the bottom of the chest lay a fourth red cap. Rory put it on, closed his eyes, and like the old women said, "I'm away to London," and clapped his hands. When Rory opened his eyes again, he was in a tavern, an old-world tavern that seemed to be several hundred years in the past, judging by the decor and the clothes of the other patrons and the very lively fiddlers who were playing in the corner. It was a rowdy place, with not only the music, but people dancing and even brawling. A large tray of full beer tankards were placed in front of Rory and the old ladies, now without their red caps on their heads. And being thirsty from his walk earlier, and liking a nice beer, Rory started helping himself. He drank and soon was very merry. He started dancing to the music and didn't notice that three old women had donned their caps again and said, "I'm away home," promptly vanishing in a puff of smoke, leaving him behind. The next morning, Rory awoke, still in the tavern, which was a right old mess from the festivities the night before. At some point he'd taken off the red cap as he'd gotten rather warm and stuffed it in his pocket. The landlord presented Rory with the bill, which included the costs not only of the drinks, but also the wages for the fiddlers and the costs from all the damage. But oh dear, here was Rory left all alone with no shoes and apparently with no usable currency, because the landlord refused to believe that the coins and notes he had in his pocket were legal tender. Soon enough, soldiers were called and they hauled off poor Rory to appear in front of a judge for not paying the bill. The judge sentenced Rory to death for this miscreants, as they really once did. Then Rory was hauled off to meet his end at the scaffold in the town square. The hangman placed the noose around Rory's neck, as was the custom in times past, and asked Rory if he had any last requests. Rory replied, "There's a red cap in my pocket, please place it on my head." The hangman gave Rory an odd look, so Rory continued, trying to spin a tale that would appeal to even the cold heart of a hangman. "It was made by my dear grandmother, it's all I have to remember her by, and it would mean so much to me if I could please wear it for my last moments." The hangman agreed, pulled out the red cap and placed it on Rory's head, and then pulled the lever to drop Rory to his death. Rory closed his eyes and cried out in desperation, "I'm away home!" Though Rory's hands were tied behind his back, he still managed with a bit of wriggling to clap his hands just in time. When he opened his eyes again, Rory was back by his little fishing boat on the bank of Loch Duich, with the noose still round his neck. Turns out, as he'd fallen through the trapdoor, the force of his fall had taken a bit of wood from the scaffolding. And guess what? It was the perfect size bit of wood to fix the hole in his boat. Now, in case you're not familiar with this, the old ladies are fairies. Red caps are a distinctive piece of fairy garb. In Cornwall and Devon, the Piskies and Pixies, respectively, were known by the euphemism of red caps because they were so very fond of wearing such items. In northern England, there's even a type of fairy known as a red cap. The idea of fairies having the wonderful ability to say where they want to go and just get there is found in folklore, and this tale has a much older parallel in some of the tales of Cornish Piskies from Porthallow, who used a similar phrase to transport themselves here, there and everywhere. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.